Diana Ross is undeniably a legendary figure in the world of music, an icon whose name is synonymous with Motown and stardom. Yet, as much as her glitz and glamour have defined her persona, there is an entirely different side to Diana Ross that many may not be familiar with. Beneath the sequins and spotlights lies a complex and, at times, troubling figure, and it's this side of Diana that some have come to know all too well. When I first heard whispers of Diana's personal revelations, I thought, finally, she's ready to share her story. I had been waiting for years, but it would take an entire year for her to reach out. By the time she did, doubts had begun to creep in. The stories about Diana Ross being a diva, though not in the glamorous sense, have circulated for years. From outlandish demands to explosive tantrums, Diana made it clear that the world was to revolve around her. Her level of ambition and enthusiasm for life was undeniable, but it came with a cost. Diana was a woman who wanted it all, and the moments when the world got a glimpse of just how intense things could get were unforgettable. But this wasn't the polished, rehearsed image that Diana Ross had spent decades building. It was something much rawer, far more complicated. Diana Ross wasn't even supposed to be the star of the Supremes. The group's formation, originally called the Primettes, was the brainchild of Florence Ballard. After a few performances with the Primettes, their manager recognized Florence's talent and encouraged her to start her own group. Florence quickly enlisted her best friend, Mary Wilson, and brought in Betty McGlown. Diana Ross was added to the mix almost as an afterthought, convinced by Mary to join in, but she wasn't picked for her vocal prowess or even for her potential. It was more about her being a good friend. However, as time went on, Diana managed to push herself into the spotlight, gradually taking over the group's identity. Florence, the mastermind behind the group, found herself shoved into the background while Diana basked in the glow of the attention. This was the beginning of what many would call Diana's main character syndrome, long before it became a popular term. The early days of the Primettes saw Florence as the shining star. She was the lead singer, the driving force behind their sound. The girls practiced endlessly, refining their harmonies and style, while Florence ensured the group was polished enough to impress their manager. Diana, however, always had her eye on the spotlight, and when the group decided to pursue a record deal, Diana leveraged her connections, particularly her relationship with Smokey Robinson, a former neighbor. She arranged an audition with Motown's Berry Gordy, though it wasn't Florence or Mary who took the reins, it was Diana. Although Gordy wasn't initially sold on the group, he encouraged them to return after finishing high school, a setback that could have destroyed their dreams. Diana, however, focused less on the group's collective effort and more on positioning herself at the center of Motown's network. She cozied up to the inner circle of the label, practically living at the studio, while the rest of the girls stayed focused on their goals. As the group navigated these turbulent waters, things started to fall apart. Betty McGlown left the group and Barbara Martin stepped in, but Diana remained focused on her own ambitions. By the time the group finally signed with Lupin Records and released two singles, Tears of Sorrow and Pretty Baby, neither was successful. The group was at a crossroads, and Florence, who had suffered immense personal trauma, struggled to keep up. In 1960, Florence experienced a horrifying attack, and rather than finding support from her bandmates, Diana seemed more concerned about the group's image and her own ascension. Florence's withdrawal from the group as she grappled with the emotional fallout was met with frustration from Diana, who allegedly felt that Florence's outbursts were an obstacle to the group's progress. By 1961, tensions within the group reached a breaking point. Florence, still reeling from her trauma, left without a clear explanation. Diana and Mary Wilson scrambled to hold the group together, but the dynamics were changing and the other girls felt it. Eventually, Florence's departure and the changes at Motown led to the group being renamed The Supremes, a name that Florence had chosen, though Diana initially objected to it. As their new identity emerged, the girls were subjected to an intense pressure to succeed. They had their first major hit when the love light starts shining through his eyes, but this marked the moment when Diana made her move. She stepped into the spotlight, pushing Florence aside and securing her position as the lead singer. From then on, Diana's rise to fame was practically unstoppable. Though the Supremes began to climb the charts, the group dynamic was fractured. Florence, who had once been the group's heart, felt pushed aside. Diana and Mary worked to maintain their careers, but Diana had already secured her place at the top of the Motown hierarchy. As the group continued to release hit after hit, it was clear that Diana was positioned as the face of the Supremes, and this created a rift that would only deepen over time. Florence's struggles with depression and alcohol exacerbated the tension within the group. Diana, ever the strategic mastermind, made sure to keep the spotlight on her, with Berry Gordy, Motown's founder, backing her every move. Gordy admitted in later interviews that Diana was his top pick from the beginning, and his favoritism was apparent. As Florence's struggles worsened, Gordy moved quickly to replace her with a backup singer, leaving Diana firmly in the center. The tension between the two women grew, and when Diana left the Supremes in 1970, her relationship with Gordy continued to flourish, both professionally and personally. Their romantic relationship may have ended, but it was clear that Gordy had a special place in his heart for Diana. For Florence, however, the fallout was devastating. She struggled with the collapse of her career and her personal life, and Diana's continued rise only served as a painful reminder of her fall from grace. Florence's tragic death in 1976, at just 32 years old, marked the end of an era for the Supremes. Diana's appearance at Florence's funeral was controversial, with many questioning her sincerity. Despite the tension, Diana attended the service sitting with Florence's family, but her dramatic entrance and sobs were met with mixed reactions from those who remembered the way she had overshadowed Florence during their time together. As Diana continued to dominate the music scene, the legacy of the Supremes remained tangled in the complex relationships that defined their rise to fame. Mary Wilson, who remained with Diana through the years, eventually shared her own frustrations in interviews. She expressed how Diana's desire to be the center of attention often led to feelings of alienation among the other members. Even as the group achieved monumental success, the personal costs of their fame were deeply felt by all involved. For Diana Ross, her rise to the top came with significant sacrifices, some of which are only now being understood in full. Despite her immense talent and contributions to music, the story of Diana Ross is one filled with complex emotions, unspoken tensions, and difficult choices. Her legacy as an iconic diva is undeniable, but it's also marked by the sacrifices of others along the way. The saga of the Supremes and Diana's role in it is a testament to both the highs of musical success and the deep human cost of ambition and stardom. In genuine friendships, it's easy to get lost in the sparkling allure of Diana Ross's legendary status, but behind the dazzling performances and iconic hits, there's a story of ambition, rivalry, and hurt that shaped the trajectory of her career and the careers of those around her. The path to superstardom for Diana Ross was paved with both personal and professional cost. The Supremes were not just a girl group, they were a phenomenon, and their rise mirrored the struggles of their internal dynamics. The tension between Diana, Florence, and Mary reached its peak in the 1960s when Motown made a deliberate decision to place Diana front and center, not just as a member of the Supremes, but as the face of the entire group. As much as Diana's talent was undeniable, her drive and the way she maneuvered to maintain that spotlight left deep scars, particularly with Florence Ballard, who felt increasingly marginalized. Florence, who had been the heart and soul of the Supremes, found herself overshadowed by Diana's unrelenting ambition and Motown's favoritism toward her. While Diana basked in the spotlight, Florence faced personal demons, and the group's internal strife became impossible to ignore. Florence's struggles, including the devastating trauma she faced in 1960, were minimized or overlooked by those around her, including Diana. Florence was battling the psychological toll of being betrayed and attacked, but instead of offering support, Diana focused on her own rising fame. Florence's emotional withdrawal was interpreted as erratic behavior, a misunderstanding that only deepened the rift between her and Diana. As the group rebranded into Diana Ross and the Supremes in 1967, it was a turning point that further emphasized Diana's dominance. Mary Wilson, who had been an equal partner in the group, saw herself sidelined as Diana took on a more prominent role, eventually stepping into the lead singer position during the group's most successful years. Yet, this shift was not without resentment. Mary Wilson would later recount how Diana's thirst for fame often came at the expense of the group's unity, and how Diana's diva-like behavior became more pronounced, especially as the media and Motown started to elevate her to a star status. The internal discord came to a head in the early 70s when Florence's personal and professional struggles led to her departure from the Supremes, and the group was essentially redefined without her. Florence's departure was not just a loss for the group, but a tragic chapter in her life, marked by isolation and heartbreak. Diana, now the undisputed star of the Supremes, continued to ride the wave of success, even as her relationships within the group deteriorated. By the time the Supremes were truly on top of the world, with hits like Stop, In the Name of Love, and Where Did Our Love Go?, the foundations of their unity had already cracked. Diana had successfully positioned herself as the face of the group, and the friction between her and Mary was palpable. It was clear that while Diana was the one shining in the limelight, there was a deep sense of alienation and frustration among her bandmates. The public narrative surrounding the Supremes, driven by media speculation and sensationalism, painted a picture of jealousy and rivalry. Yet, the real story was far more complex. It was about the dynamics of a group struggling to maintain its sense of camaraderie while battling the overwhelming pressures of fame, management, control, and the music industry. As Diana basked in the glory of being Motown's brightest star, she found herself increasingly isolated from the women who had helped her get there. Diana's relationship with Motown's Berry Gordy also added fuel to the fire. As the founder and head of Motown, Gordy had an undeniable influence over the group's trajectory. His favoritism towards Diana was no secret, and many believe it was this connection that allowed Diana to rise above the other members. Gordy's deep admiration for Diana was evident not only in his professional support, but also in their personal relationship. Their romantic entanglement only added layers of tension within the group, particularly for Florence, who saw Gordy as a mentor before Diana's influence took hold. The dissolution of the Supremes in the early 70s marked the end of an era, but not the end of Diana's influence in the music world. While Florence's struggles continued, Diana went on to achieve solo success, becoming an enduring symbol of Motown and the epitome of a music icon. But for those who had been close to her, particularly Mary Wilson, there was a sense of bitterness over how the journey unfolded. Their paths diverged, with Wilson expressing her dissatisfaction with how things played out. She revealed the deep-seated frustration she felt regarding the way Diana had maneuvered her way to the front of the group, often at the expense of the other members. In later years, Diana's legacy as a diva became more than just a part of her stage persona. It became a symbol of the ruthlessness of the music business, where fame and fortune often require stepping over others to stay at the top. As Diana herself would later acknowledge in interviews, her relationship with the Supremes was complex, and the decisions made along the way were not always easy or without consequence. Yet, despite all the drama, the one constant is Diana's undeniable talent. Her vocal range, stage presence, and charisma made her an international star. But when reflecting on her legacy, one must also consider the price she paid to achieve that level of success. For Diana, the spotlight was always within reach, but it came with a cost. The toll it took on her friendships, her relationships, and the group that helped launch her career. Today, Diana Ross remains a towering figure in music history, but her story is far more layered than the one-dimensional diva narrative. Behind the sequins and glitter is a tale of ambition, rivalry, personal sacrifice, and the sometimes painful cost of fame. Diana Ross may have been Motown's golden girl, but the price she paid to wear that crown was a heavy one, and the scars it left behind are a part of her story that should not be forgotten.